Hey, everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod Barbecue. On today's episode, I have my longtime buddy, my partner in automotive crime for many an endeavor, Mr. Vinny Russo, who's the head of special projects for the ID agency, as well as the operations manager for Westside Collector Car Storage down in Los Angeles. Buddy, how you doing, man?
Good, great, actually. Really, really good.
Wow, great, 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 great
Yeah.
is great. What's happening that makes everything so great right now?
Weather's good. Progress is being made on projects, and I haven't bought anything in a while, so it's probably a safe bet.
So let's talk about projects for a second, because you and I both have two projects that are going on. You with the
Uh,
Cadillac and me with the Charger. So let's tell everybody. Vinny is the guy that I call when I say, hey, what do you think of this? And he's one of the few people out there that will give me the honest opinion on this is dumb or this is good. However, right? Like
and this is dumb is not necessarily an exclusion from buying
no,
it.
no.
It just means you know this is dumb. I'm behind you on it. I still think you should get it.
Right.
It's dumb though.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So Vin, let's go into the Cadillac. Tell everybody what your Cadillac is, and tell everybody Vinny's got one of the slickest sleds in the whole world, but there's a great story behind it. Go into this for a second.
Yeah, so you and I buy cars for the stories.
Yeah.
And there's a handful of car guys that we're friends with that do the same. And sometimes it's an investment, sometimes it's a story. If you're lucky, it's both. So I came across let me restart. I was looking for a Cadillac. I wanted an older Cadillac. I wanted a 69 or 70. And I had done some research. I was looking at a couple of them and found out the 69 and 70 wasn't quite really up to par as far as like having the aftermarket and replacement parts, business behind it. You couldn't get a wiring harness for it. There's a lot of things you couldn't get for it because
Right.
it wasn't shared with much. So our mutual friend Jeb goes to a Cars and Coffee in where the hell was he live? Maryland at the time, and had seen this guy there. Older gentleman comes up with his 65 Cadillac, perfectly stock. It's actually a Cadillac Calais, two-door, 65. So saw it there for months, talked to the guy in passing as you do in Cars and Coffee. You get to know all the cars that are there. And then the next week, this guy shows up in a Rolls Royce Phantom.
Hmm.
He's like, nice car, but where's the caddy? And he's like, he goes, I saw this car at the dealership and I had to have it, blah, blah, blah. So he ends up telling him, he's like, look, I still have the caddy. He goes, and I actually have to sell it because winter's coming. I don't want it to sit outside and my second garage isn't going to be done until spring. So if you know anybody that wants it, and Jeb's like, I think I know a guy. And I was working for Lamborghini at the time, and we had a meeting in Herndon, Virginia, that Friday. So I was flying up there anyway, and I told Jeb, okay, well, I'm going to fly up there the night before. We can go and look at it. And you don't look at cars at night, but Jeb had seen it before, and I trusted him.
Yeah.
And I ended up on the phone with the guy for 2 hours, before I even went there, just telling me the whole story. I go there, pull up, and the guy hasn't even in his house yet, but the car's outside. And Jeb's like, you realize if you don't buy this, I'm buying it. I'm like, yeah, I know. So I pull up to the car. We're looking at it. The guy shows up 5 minutes after we get there, and I'm doing the flashlight, looking at everything.
Of course.
And he tells me the rest of the story. So the story basically goes that the car was purchased December 28th, 1964 at the dealership in Miami. And we'll get back to that because it's an important part of the story.
Okay.
So the gentleman that first owned it was a presidential police officer, and the car was his retirement gift to himself, that he was basically on vacation with his family and saw the car at the dealership, fell in love with it, and ended up driving home in the car. So his son was best friends with the guy that I bought the car from. And when he passed away, he gave the car to his son. And when his son inherited all these cars, he says, look, I can't keep all of these. I know that you love this car for my dad. And he had taken the car from Maryland to California at the time. So the car was in California. The guy I bought it from picked it up from him in, I want to say the early 90s.
Okay.
And he kept, both owners kept everything. I mean, it's got the protective plate stampings on it with the guy's name on it. It's got receipts from Sears where he replaced the shocks for $26 a piece. And when I get to the guy's house, he lays all the paperwork out. He's talking to me so that I got to hear about his wife had passed away 2 years earlier. And so he was having fun with all these cars, and he had an SL55. He had some other things. So I was like, done, let's do it. cash out, start doing it. But the problem was it was right before my wife's 40th birthday, like weeks before my wife's 40th birthday. And she was very supportive, ex-wife now, but at the time she was still very supportive of some of my crazy stuff. And I was like, but I still didn't want to start anything before her birthday. So I left it at Jeb's house until after her birthday, broke the news to her that I had bought a car. And she was like, I don't know why you wouldn't tell me. She goes, I was fine with it. I was like, yeah, but I wasn't going to take a chance. Had the car for a few years.
I want to know how many guys out there have uttered those same words. No, I wasn't going to take a chance.
I wasn't going to take it. I'm not going to ruin your birthday. It's fine. No problem. No harm, no foul. So I shipped the car down. My buddies at Mob Steel sent me the very first set released to the public of their steel wheels, 20-inch steel wheels. And I put some 20-inch white walls on there from Federal. And then I ended up calling in some favors and sourcing some Ride Tech parts and did a full Ride Tech air suspension on it. And that was it. Nothing. Yeah. Like just suspension, wheels, and done, and just cruise it. The car didn't need anything.
So Vin, was the motor and the drivetrain and the AC, was everything stock?
All original.
Was everything original?
Yeah, everything was original. Yeah. Hubcaps, down to the spare tire. All of the cardboard in the trunk was still there. The carpet was there. Everything was still there in the car. So it was a rare car. It was a Calais, which basically means that the DeVille had the leather seats, which always crack and go to destroyed. So my car has blue interior with cloth. Rare that it has factory AC, factory power windows, and a factory seat.
Yeah, like every option in that car.
On a Calais. Now, the DeVille, you can get power door locks and power trunk opener, but they were vacuum operated. Again, never worked properly. The DeVille had cruise control, which worked, but this car actually had aftermarket cruise control put in it sometime in the 80s, which was actually functional. So yeah, the car checked out. Everything worked on it. And so I left it alone. I just maintained it, did a full fluid change, did everything I could do to it, put the air ride on it, and just cruised it for years. And it got to the point where I was keeping it outside when I lived in Florida. And after a couple of years of that, it started to kind of weather and I spent $700, the best car cover that Covercraft had, because it's 22 feet long. So of course, you're pricing out RV size car covers.
Right.
And so I had it and I ended up selling it to our friend, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
It killed me to do it, but I knew him. It was a good, it was a good deal. And I said, okay, fine. So he flies down with his wife, drives it from Tampa to Dallas. Now I set him up. Now it's a 65. I set him up with a box of belts, hoses, every coolant hose, every belt you could possibly need, spare fluids, every fluid in the car, at least one jug of coolant, pre-mixed, everything you can need for a road trip that you possibly need. He used exactly none of it getting to Dallas. he took I think he took 5 or 6 days, stopped and saw some friends, got back to Dallas, had it there for 2 years, sold it to another friend of his. He was losing his parking space, which of course, parking a 22-foot car isn't great.
Big car.
So he was losing his parking space. He sold it to a buddy of his that was a farmer up in Northern California, near where you live. And Chris and us, we were all hanging out at Pebble Beach at one of the bars. And, Chris was like, hey, here's the guy that, bought your caddy from me. So we start talking and he's got a car story. So, he apparently owns over 30 hot rods. He's got a huge barn there with all these things, and tells me a story about his 59 Impala that my wife made him get rid of, that he had for years and was a member of the family, but she didn't want him driving his son around in the car without all the safety stuff. So he gets rid of it. And then if I remember correctly, he had said him and his son were at a Cars and Coffee. They saw the car, he talked to the owner, ended up buying it back from the guy, and he still has it to this day. So knowing the history that I had with the car and how much I loved it and everything that I did with it, and his wife was like, just sell it back to him. You don't use it. You don't need it. And I said, listen, I know what you bought it from Chris from. I know what you put into it. I was like, I'm not in a position really. I had just gotten divorced. I was like, I'm not taking a chunk of the money from the house.
Right.
Paying for a car. I was like, it just doesn't make sense to trying to be responsible. He said, just make me an offer, whatever you think. And we went for a month back and forth on the phone all night at the bar. And then for another month on the phone, talking about the car, talking about his other cars, and then him trying to get me to give him an offer. And I said, listen, I was like, I'm not being strategic here. I was like, I just don't want to offend you. I was like, I can't, I was like, I don't want to put out an offer because I know what it's worth. And I can't afford that right now. He goes, listen, he's like, I don't need the money. I don't care. Give me a number that you're comfortable with. And worst I can say is yes or no. He goes, we'll still be friends. We're still car guys. No big deal.
Sure.
So I threw him out a number. He goes, come get it. And I'm like,
wow.
Hey, Mike, I'm coming up to visit. You want to take a trip? So I grabbed my girlfriend, Tanis, and we flew up to come see you. And we all took a little road trip up to, was it Chico? I think it was Chico, California, which I didn't even know existed until I met this guy. And of course, we pull up to his place. Sure enough, it's on a farm. He's got a big barn. He opens up the door. He's got a whole collection of stuff. And and so we counted out the cash and called it a day. And I drove back to California. Now, to interject, he drove the car from Dallas, Northern California, again with no issues.
Yeah.
So now keep in mind, I mean, we all own
this car's been on the road. This car is a road trip champion.
And has the only time it ever gave me any kind of an issue was in front of the AutoZone that I had stopped to get some stuff. I come out of the AutoZone and had dumped all of its coolant onto the ground. There was a plug for an accessory that on the water pump that was a rubber plug, which I believe was the original plug on the water pump. Had finally decided to fail. But I was at AutoZone, so I just walked in. I grabbed the stuff that I needed. I made a plug out of whatever, plugged it in, bought some coolant, and drove the car home. So technically, I didn't get stuck.
Right.
So yeah,
Vinny,
the car.
What engine and transmission are in that car?
So it's a 3-speed transmission, as most of them had back then, the standard one, and it's a 429. Which is weird to say. It's weird to say because everybody's like, "Oh, you swapped a Ford in there." I'm like, "No, GM made a 429 for the Cadillacs in that year, and then they switched it out to a 502, which is what most of the other ones were." So it's it's one of those where it's like 100 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque kind of engine.
Right.
It is what it is. But the car's been great, and so we drove it back to California, and then when I moved to Miami, I transported it out there, had it in Miami. And the funny thing about the story about what I was saying about where it was purchased is, so I was working for Curated in Miami at the time.
Yep.
So where Curated is downtown is directly across from there's a Cadillac dealership there, and it's Brayman is like Rolls Royce, Bentley, all the high-end stuff.
Explain to everybody what Curated is.
So it's actually called We Are Curated, and it's a shop in Miami that specializes in vintage supercars, if you can believe that. So think Testarossa, Countach. Mm-hmm. They get into some modern like XJ220s and things like that, but they're basically their bread and butter is Diablos and Countaches. They have some highly trained special techs there. The owner John buys. The only things he buys are very, very rare or very low miles. Yeah. Some sort of a story behind them. 1 of 1, 500 delivery miles, that kind of stuff like that. He's had some crazy stuff. We worked on the very first F50 there. We worked on the fourth Countach ever built, which was the first one ever delivered to a customer. I mean, just cars like that. Yeah. But literally within 2 blocks of where Curated was the Cadillac dealership that this car was originally purchased at.
And it was the dealership was still there.
It's still a Cadillac dealership, different owners, a different name, but it's physically the same building and it's still a Cadillac dealership out of there from when the car was purchased new. So I tried at the 50th anniversary of the purchase. I tried when I was living in Tampa to get the car down there to get pictures, and I never could get it down there on that particular date. But it was kind of weird to think about how full circle everything comes. Yeah. When I end up working 2 blocks from where this car, was originally purchased, it was kind of neat. So yeah, we've had some fun with that car and done some things you can only do in old cars. Our buddy Troy we took the car down to the Keys and had lunch. Yep. On the way back, we threw a belt. And I had a belt, but Chris unfortunately took the tools out. So I had the parts still, didn't have tools. And I end up getting Uber from Homestead I called up the GM at the Advanced Auto Parts in Homestead, told the GM the situation. I made an online order for the parts that I needed and told him I was going to send an Uber to pick the parts up. He gave the parts to the Uber driver. The Uber driver drives us out in the middle of the mangroves, and we end up changing the belt on the side of the road. Because you can do that in an old car.
You can do that. That's right.
So again, it broke a little bit, but it didn't leave me stranded.
That's right.
I still drove the car home. So it's a trooper.
So is that car now here to stay?
Yeah, it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. It's part of the family. Tanis had a painting commissioned by a very famous automotive painter that did posters and things like that for all kinds of different covers of magazines and whatnot. So she had for my birthday or Christmas one year, had a painting commissioned of the car out here in California. So it's too many memories, and I'm hopefully will never be in a situation that I need to get rid of it, but it's there now. So it's in Houston, getting a few things updated at a buddy shop in Houston, and then I'll have it back hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
I'll tell you that, I think when cars come in and out of your life like that, I'm sure we have a lot of people that listen that understand this. I feel like you get one shot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you get one kind of like, you get to give it away once. And then
Yeah.
if it comes back, you either take it or you never ever see it again.
And just forget about it.
And yeah. So the fact that it kind of went this kind of full circle route, and that it was sold to a friend who then sold it to somebody else who just randomly happened to meet at a car event, who then wanted to say, I mean, it's just, I feel like that car was always meant to be in your garage.
It just fell into place. And, at the time it fit the bill for me because I was, helping out Hennessey and working in all these other places. Like I had access to every fast car I ever wanted. And for me, the car it's like meditation. I mean, having a car with 4-wheel drum brakes that's that heavy and that big, like you are forced to focus on your driving and just slow and cruise and low. And it's not a show car by any means, but it's fun.
Well, but how crazy is that especially when we are curated, right? And you've got cars that are worth millions upon millions upon millions of dollars sitting in that showroom. And yet you walk out to a 65 Calais, and that car, because I've seen that car, it is stunning. And when it's dropped on the bags, and it's one of those cars that you cannot walk past. You have to stop. And it really eclipses 90% of the stuff that was in that showroom.
It did. I would take it almost every Friday. That was my one thing. Because I only lived a few miles from there anyways, it didn't matter. And I would take it, assuming it wasn't pouring rain, I would take it on Fridays to work, and I would park it. The curated has the way the building is situated, there's parking in the front and then down the side. Yeah. And they display the cars right on 2nd Avenue. So when people drive by, they can see all these row of amazing cars. I would always bring the Caddy on Fridays. I'd park it on the side of the building, but people would come up and they would try and buy that all the time. People would stop in traffic and come out and take pictures of it. How much? I'm like, not for sale. Sorry.
Right.
It is, but it's nice that it's clean enough that I can take it anywhere. I bring it to any show, and it stops traffic against anything that's there. But it's not so clean that I can't take it to Publix or the grocery store.
Right.
For anybody who doesn't have Publix, and I don't have to worry about it. And I come out, and there's always people taking pictures of it, which is fine. I'm super happy for it. But it's just the perfect personality match to mine.
Oh, dude, if you were a car, you would be that. I mean, there's no question. Which I think is brilliant. I think it's just brilliant.
Yours kind of match your personality as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think they do. I think whatever we own, they're extensions, right? I mean, most people that listen know I've got the Charger and the Daytona, but the Charger is the one that's really, that's the car that'll always be with me forever. And, and that's going through a renovation. I'm not going to say restoration. I'm going to say renovation. Restoration implies the whole thing's getting redone, but just we're doing wiring and mechanicals and stuff like that. But one of the other passions that both Vin and I share is motorcycles, particularly the stuff from, I want to say, the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And having been an impressionable kid back then, I've owned probably 30 motorcycles. Vin has had his share of stuff. Yeah. And we always bounce stuff off each other. So like about a couple of years, maybe 3-4 years ago, I got the itch to buy another bike, and I had gone out and bought an old 93 VFR. And then Vinny started talking about buying a Suzuki TL 1000R, which is big, brute of a V twin. And, now it's just constantly back and forth with bikes. And if anybody out there listening is into vintage bikes, and it's weird because when I talk about a TLR, or I talk about like a Kawasaki ZX7, I don't think of them as vintage, but like they're 30 years old.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I had a ZX7 when I was in college, and it was great. And it's kind of a kick in the balls.
The fact that you said vintage and we're talking, I'm like, I guess it is vintage.
Right? Because what year is Vinny went out? I'm going to give everybody a little backstory. So Vinny has this thing where whatever it is, whatever year it is, it's the nicest one that it is, regardless of the miles. So Vin calls me up one day and he's like, so I think I found this TLR and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, how many miles are on? He's like, 35,000?
24,000 is when I got it. Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a lot of miles on a big old V twin. He then starts sending me photos of this bike, and it literally looks like it came out of a showroom. In fact, it's better than it would have came out of a showroom. So And what year is that bike?
2000.
2000. 22 years old, right?
Yeah.
So like we go back and forth on these things, and I don't like with the old cars and the old bikes. I'm always curious as to why we like that stuff as opposed to the new stuff.
There's a handful of the new things I do like. I think it's because there's a certain amount of personality. There's a certain panache of, I want to say, tackling it. It's almost like climbing a mountain, and you get to say that you did it. I mean, you'd show up somewhere in your Charger, driving the way that you drive the Charger. I show up in the Caddy, willy-nilly parking it anywhere like it's a regular car. And I think there's something to be said. I mean, if you look in the movies and you think back of all the different movies and all the different stuff that you see, why is John Wick driving an old Ford Mustang as opposed to driving some 911 Turbo? There seems to always be this certain, like, you have to have a certain personality to be able to have the patience to drive an old car. And a lot of people get into it and they don't. They aren't okay with the weird noise that it just made. What was that? They aren't okay with, I go to turn the key and it doesn't work. And you're like, and you just have to learn to roll with it. But that's part of it. But when it's working and when it goes, there's nothing else. And we always talk about this. It's a matter of the experience. You're driving the car because of the experience that it has. And part of the experience of an old car is just being able to drive it without it breaking.
Yeah.
And getting it to the point where you can do that. And I think that there's just something, part of it is, it's part of our history. It's part of, we were able to buy cars now we weren't able to buy then, or rebuy stuff that we had then that had memories to us. And I just think it's an emotional thing. Whereas a new car, I didn't grow up with a Bugatti Chiron poster, on my wall. I love the car. Not in a position to buy one, but if I was, I would consider it. But I still think I would have a much bigger collection of older stuff, just because there's a personality that goes with it. There's an emotional connection that you can't match with anything else.
Right.
And to find the cars that we found that we have such a love for, it takes time, because you never really know what your personality is. I mean, you don't really know, like, you can say you like it and then you get it and then you meet your hero and it's not quite what you want, but then 3 or 4 more cars down the road you get this one car. And listen, it may be something weird, it may be something that doesn't make sense to anybody else, but it may be that car does something for you that no other car can, and then now it's a member of the family. You'll never get rid of it. I mean, I have a good buddy of mine back in Tampa that he in high school wanted a Contour SVT.
That's cool, the most car. Random thing ever.
I mean, he's a mortgage broker. He's got a whole family, he does whatever. Like, his wife finally okayed him to get a toy, and that's what he wanted. He could have had anything, but he's like, I always wanted one. He searched for months to find the right one, and now he's got this one. He's done suspension on it and brakes, and he swapped out the V6 for a bigger Duratec V6. And I mean, everything that he could find that people have done to a Contour, he's done. And he's got this badass little Contour SVT that he shows up at a Cars and Coffee next to his buddies who have Vets and Lambos and things like that. And here he is in this Contour and just happy as a pig in shit. Just like, this is what I wanted. But that's him. He was able to do it. He has it the way that he always wanted it. And it's just random. It's random. So
isn't it weird how we gravitate to certain things? Like, I'm always happy when I find something that I like that I didn't know I was going to like. So, like, for example, when I have you obviously know my Bronco, my 96 Bronco, and I bought that as a kind of an interim daily driver. I was like, and I got mine before they went bananas. And so it was just, when I bought it, it was just an old truck. It was just an old Bronco. It wasn't anything special. It was just an old Bronco.
Cool.
And now, and Vinny and I were talking about this before the podcast. Like, I also have an old 911, and I got news. If the choice comes, and it will be coming soon, the 911 is going, but the Bronco's staying. And I just fell in love with that thing. And it doesn't do anything well. Nothing. Nope. It sucks down fuel. It drives like a tractor. It's not fast.
Nope.
But I just dig it.
Doesn't have a ton of room.
For such a big thing, it's got no room. But it's one of those trucks that every time I see it, I just smile, and I'm like, hey, I don't know, it just makes me happy. It's 65 in the slow lane, just cruising along.
this is what growing up is, though. Like all of a sudden being okay with, you know what, this means something to me, and I'm not showing off for somebody else.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, because I know that I bought cars that I thought were cool, but I knew that everybody else would think they're way cooler. And it was neat to have, and I crossed off the list and moved on. And it's taken years to be able to kind of fine tune what you really want out of things and be able to say stuff like that and say, look, you know, this goofy Bronco that's not expensive, it's not anything other than just clean
Right.
example of exactly what it is, but like it
Yeah.
does something for you.
Well, let
And
me I want to talk about your LX for a sec, your truck. So Vinny's got, what is it, LX4
570.
570. So it's the Lexus. Would it be fair to say that it's the Lexus version of the Toyota Land Cruiser?
Yeah, 200 series. So the last of the quote unquote real Land Cruisers.
Okay.
You know, V8 all-wheel drive, you know, full frame, the whole 9 yards. But I've had many Toyota SUVs over the years, multiple Land Cruisers, 2 different 80 series, 100 series, and there's just something about them I just always love them.
So what is it? Because I know before this one, you had the straight 6 powered Land Cruiser, and we went back and forth because Vinny's like, I love the truck, it's amazing, but I mean that's got to be a 5,000-pound truck, and it just didn't have the get up and go.
It wouldn't go over 80 miles an hour on the highway, and it was stock. At the time I hadn't really done anything to it. It didn't tow much. It got horrendous gas mileage. It was a really fun toy around town. It was good in Miami because I only lived 2 miles from work at the time. But the problem was, if I wanted to go on a road trip, it took me forever to get anywhere that I needed to go. And like I said, with the gas mileage being horrible, and it you know, it was comfortable to a certain point, but not super comfortable.
Right.
And I think, you know, but I still love the truck. But it just became, numbers wise, it was impractical. And then so to get into a 200 series, has a bigger V8, has a lot more amenities. You know, I could do 110 in it on the highway if I wanted to. It'll tow 8,100 pounds.
Yep.
So for more of a daily, as little as I was, you know, using it back and forth, it was a perfect truck. But and I wanted an actual Land Cruiser, but the hardcore guys don't like the Lexus. You know, it's like you know. They think it's too mall crawler-ish.
But essentially, it really is the same truck, though, isn't it?
It's the same truck, different headlights, you know, some more different things in the interior, but it's built the same. You know, the drivetrain's the same, everything else is the same. It's got the you know, raise and lower suspension. It's got KDSS, which is the sway bar system. But it's got everything the Land Cruiser, the Land Cruiser has. It's just a little bit higher end. It's got the Lexus badge on it, but it was between $5,000 and $10,000 cheaper to get the Lexus over the Land Cruiser.
Isn't that crazy?
Just because. But yeah, it's completely nuts. But I know that that's a truck I'll have forever. You know, I don't have to worry about it.
Now, because I don't know much. I know about the American stuff, Blazers, Broncos, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, those things are also known for their kind of bomb-proof reliability. So does mileage scare you on those things, or like if you see one with 100,000 miles, you're like, nah, it's too many miles?
No, the only thing on this one is, as long as the timing belt's been done, it has to get done every 100,000 miles. And believe it or not, at a dealership, it shouldn't cost you more than $900 to do a timing belt on that truck, which isn't bad. Couple of things that are weird on them is like the starter is in the valley of the V. So if the starter goes out, it can be a little bit of a pain to do. But reliability wise, to 300, 400,000 miles, no problem. Stock engine, you know, there's been guys documented. I mean, most of the 80 series Land Cruisers can go 500,000 miles, no problem.
Yeah.
You know, I had a 100 series with 260,000 miles. I would have jumped in that car from Florida and drove to California. I wouldn't have even checked the oil because I knew it didn't burn any. They're just, and there's something about the Land Cruiser. You know, is it as big as the Sequoia? No. You know, is there's something about it.
That's an interesting point about the Sequoia, because for those that don't know, I mean, Toyota came out with the Sequoia, which is bigger than the Land Cruiser. And the Sequoia is, I mean, it's a big truck, but they never really caught. Like, they're around. Don't get me wrong. They're out there, and they got to be half the price you know,
easily.
Then, but nobody really looks at those like they do the cruisers.
Nobody looks at anything like they look at the Cruiser. A Land Cruiser is an icon, and it's, for me, there's just something about it that every time I didn't have one, I wanted another one. And it's one of those things where like once you own it, there's something about walking up to it and seeing it, because you don't see them very often. And when you do, you're like Land Cruiser.
Yeah.
And you just always know. I mean, and I've had Jeeps, I've had Forerunners, I've had,
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have had a collection
Oh
of
yeah.
everything. But I always end up going back to that Land Cruiser, and just there's something about it. I think because when I was younger, I had a neighbor with a Land Cruiser, and he was extremely successful. And it was like at the time to have that, and this was an 80 series. It was he had a 96 at the time, and my first Land Cruiser was a 97 40th anniversary. But it was one of those things where he had, he was super successful, and that's what he drove was his Land Cruiser, and you didn't see them very often. And I think somewhere in my head, to me, there's this certain sense of success that comes along with
Yeah.
them. I mean, beyond the durability and the history,
Sure.
and that it's an automotive icon. There's something about just walking out into the parking lot and seeing it and being like, it's just, and it's great. And I drove it from Miami to LA. We took a 3-week road trip on it. It's comfortable. It's
Yeah.
huge. Sucks down gas like there's no tomorrow, but I don't care. I just don't care. I mean, you get to a point where it's not, doesn't matter.
Well, isn't that crazy? Where everybody will come out and they'll be like, well, this sucks down fuel. This sucks down fuel. And, $6-7 a gallon as it was in California for so long.
Yeah, it hurt.
It hurt, but yeah, we still do them, right? We still do it. So
miles for smiles.
It is. So then what is next? What other vehicles do you look at? Having, being in the industry, and this is the other part, right? Vinny and I, we look at stuff to buy all the time. We don't look at new stuff, but we'll look at stuff that's anywhere, I want to say between 50 years old and maybe 15 years old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In that gamut. Everything from pickup trucks to little SUVs to sports cars to motorcycles to everything.
Anything and everything.
Yeah. So like,
I'll get a message from Mike, and it'll be, I can see that it's a link, and I'm like, oh God, what is this going to be?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll open it up, and you'll simply get a text message back. Nope, not happening. Or like, tell me more.
Right.
It's an emotional thing for us. I think part of it is the thrill of the hunt. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
For me, I know that a good part of it is also hearing the stories. What the car, if we find a weird car like that we want to know the story about why the guy has it, why he bought it, why he's getting rid of it. And I don't know. I mean, part of it is I think we're just a glutton for punishment. And our poor wives and girlfriends.
I know. So what's next on your list? Is there anything that you're looking for now, or like when you're looking at the markets, you're like, oh, this one's gonna pop. Like I should try to get this before.
I still keep an eye out for T-top 87 Fox body Mustang, and then bleed over into T-top Grand Nationals a little bit, but that's a little bit higher on the budget side. I did briefly have a T-top 87 Mustang GT,
which was gorgeous, by the way.
It was red on red. It was automatic.
But it was a nice car.
It was a really nice car, and it's out here in California somewhere. It was a preacher that bought it. His son saw it at an event, and he's like, my dad had the same car and he'd love to get another one. And he was a doctor. He's like, my dad's a preacher, I want to buy this for him.
Yeah.
And I wasn't ready to sell at the time, but I was like, all right, you know what? It's a story. And, he came over, he was solid, he was legit. And I knew it was going to go to a good home, somebody that appreciated it. And it was automatic, which I had actually looked into. I was going to swap it out for a 5-speed. I'm like, I probably shouldn't do that. So that's still on my list. Is I still love to get another Fox body Mustang, preferably T-top. I really want something, like a Gen 3 Supra with Targa, something convertible, I think, and maybe a little toy. I mean, when I was in Miami, I had an ST430 for a little bit, which great road trip car, horrible for luggage space.
Right.
It's a good highway cruiser, but it doesn't really do much else. That was supposed to be my answer to the road trip for the Land Cruiser. I was like, I have the 80 series. Like, oh, you know what? I'll buy an ST430, 2-seater, convertible. I'm in Miami. Tanis will drive it. She'll look good in it. It'll be great. And we went to go take it on one road trip. We're like, we can only fit one night's luggage in this car. Because otherwise, because when you put the top down as a hard top, it takes up the entire trunk. Yeah. So then you got to put everything in the back seat, and you can't keep the top down if everything's in the back seat because you stop and somebody's going to steal something. So it's like you literally have like one night's worth of luggage you can put in the car. I was like, it's great on the road, but you can't go anywhere with it, Plus we had the dog with us.
Isn't that interesting when like when you buy something for the experience of it, you're like, all right, well, I think this is going to be great, blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, huh, like, it's weird. Like I last year, a couple of years ago now, my 95 F-150, and it was a single cab, short bed, 2-wheel drive, straight six manual, right? And I put a leveling kit on it, some bigger wheels, and the truck looked awesome. However, it was kind of useless, meaning it like a single cab pickup to me is useless. You can't put anything in it, right?
No.
With the open bed, I can't store anything in it unless I put a bed cover on it. And so I sold it. But now I can't stop looking at them again. And I go back to it and I'm like, you sold it because it was a useless vehicle for you. And yet now you want it again. But I want the same truck. I want a straight six manual. And I don't know why. I thought it was fun with the manual, and trucks with a manual are, I think, at times more fun than cars with a manual. And I don't know why, if it's because you're just trying to get this big lump of metal down the street and it's more engaging,
Yeah, totally.
But like if I would manually swap my Bronco. I think that might be fun.
Cool. No,
because
it's been done.
It's something different. And I mean, a few years ago, we filmed that Road to Improvement series, and we did a manual swap on this K5 or this K10 Suburban. And we did a TR 40/55 speed, and goddamn, that was fun to drive. I mean, that was a hoot.
I remember that video series. It seemed like a bunch of fun, but you have to go into it with the truck knowing that it's useless, and it's basically you buying a Porsche Boxster or some other toy. I mean, it's literally just that useless, except you can't take it on the track. It's literally it would just be, which is fine. But I think when you bought the truck at the time, I mean, I know you bought it, you weren't planning on keeping it. I know you fell in love with it. It was going to be something you rolled over anyway. But now you have to go into it knowing that, okay, I'm strictly buying a toy, which makes it hard to justify.
Right.
Because you couldn't, with the 6-cylinder, you couldn't really tow much with it, like you said.
It was useless.
Couldn't get out of his own way. I mean, it's totally useless, but it was still a cool
fun.
car.
It was fun. And I don't know if it was because like everywhere you went, people were like, that's a cool looking truck. And you were like, yes, it is, but it's useless. Like,
Well, it's cool because you don't see them either, and in that condition that truck was in, you definitely don't see those older Fords like that in that condition either. So of course you've got guys that were like, I remember my dad had one that was new and all these other things. And, anytime you can get somebody, the emotional attachment on the car to somebody, it's going to completely change your perspective of it.
Right.
So we are insane though. We are completely insane. I mean, and I know there's other car guys out there that are listening to this that are like, oh my God, I totally can relate.
Oh,
but
totally.
To the rest of the, the people out there and our loved ones that have to share life with us. I mean, sometimes they don't get it. If you're lucky enough as a car guy, like you are with your wife and me with my girlfriend, and, and even over the years, my ex-wife was more understandable about my addiction than most would expect it to be. But you do, but it takes years to be able to have the self-control, or you got to find a buddy where you can text and they're like, no.
I think that's that. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest things, right? It's, you have to have a barometer, right? You have to have somebody who's going to talk you off the ledge, because it's kind of like a tattoo in a sense, right? Where like everybody says, if you're going to get a tattoo, draw it and stare at the image for like 6 months. And if you still want it after 6 months, okay, then get it. The unfortunate part is you can't really do that with a car if a good deal comes up. And that's the other issue. It's like, I'm a sucker for a good deal.
Yeah.
And so like a car comes up and I'm like, ooh, that's cheap. Right? Like I could see a Dodge Omni in perfect condition for cheap. And I'd be like, I should probably buy that. And then I would text Vin and be like, no, dummy. Like, no, you don't. It's a nice car, but it was a shit box from new. So why are you buying it now? You know?
I don't think I've bought anything in the last 10 years. I didn't clear with you first.
No, well, same thing, dude. Same exact thing. And it's just, it is a vicious cycle, but it's a fun cycle. It is a fun cycle. And and I think if you have that friend that will go through all the pros and cons, right? And when I say pros and cons, I'm talking about what's it going to cost to maintain? Where are you going to put it? How much is it going to cost to insure? Is it reliable? Are you going to make money on it, or are you going to lose money on it? Right?
What are you going to do with it?
What are you going to do with it? Right. It's exactly correct.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things whereby you have to, I think you have to have that. And I think between our circle of friends, we're very, very fortunate that we've talked a lot of each other off the ledge by making very poor financial decisions, you know?
Yeah.
So I think,
or been there to be a shoulder to cry on when you
well,
didn't
I
listen
think
to the advice and still did it anyway.
Well,
like, told you so.
Well, it's funny.
Whatever.
Well, I'll throw one more story out because we're actually coming up on an hour, which is ridiculous. Vinny and I bought Porsches at the same time. And I know when you say, oh, we bought Porsches at the same time, it makes you sound like you have a lot of money. We didn't buy expensive Porsches. We bought crappy Porsches. Well, we didn't buy crappy Porsches.
You should preface this that, like, people don't understand that when we talk about buying cars, they could be $1,000. They're very rarely $100,000. They're more affordable than most people would think.
They're like between $10,000 and $15,000.
Yeah.
Around there. Anyway,
right? Yeah. So we bought Porsches.
I bought an 86 928, and Vinny bought a Cayman GT or a Cayenne GTS, which is very, very rare. And we both bought them, and we said, this is the bucket list cars. We want them. They're going to be great.
Yeah.
And then we were like, these are expensive, like, to maintain. And like every now and then I'll get a call from Ben. He'd be like, yeah, man, I put LEDs in this thing and the whole electrical system went. I'll be like, yeah, I did that. I tried to put a window switch in the 928 and it just cracked in half. And like, it's one of those things. And I think we both came to the realization, like, we're just not that guy.
We're not Porsche guys.
We're not Porsche guys. And like I said, like, I have one now, but it'll be leaving eventually, probably sooner rather than later. And like, I feel like every time I dip my toe back into the world of, like, I don't know, German engineering, the other toe is just like, no, dummy, just go buy something with a big American V8 and shut up.
It takes a certain, I mean, I would also include Land Rovers in that, the BMWs, the Porsches, that kind of stuff. I mean, there's listen, in the car community, there's jokes about these unreliable European cars. And I know you're going to get roasted. There are people out there with BMWs 250,000 mile Porsches with, I've seen 911s with over 300,000 miles.
Oh yeah.
Not saying it's not possible, but you have to be in a certain position in your world that you just have to not care. Yeah. You say, okay, when it's running and it's driving, great, I'm going to enjoy it. If it breaks, it breaks. I don't care.
Right.
And I think you and I are too much like, I want to use it when I want to use it, and I don't want it to be broken, or I don't want to be able to not understand why it's not fixed.
Right.
And the GTS to me was the ultimate SUV. I mean, it at the time I was trying to combine two different cars. I needed something that was good on the highway. I needed something I could still tow with. And like, I literally, as I made this pro and con list in my head, I'm going to, and I'm like, look, it's fast, it's rare, it's got street cred. I can pull up to an event in a Cayenne GTS. It handles. I mean, I drove the thing through Texas at 115 miles an hour with the cruise control on.
Yeah.
Granted, I only had half of the lighting on the truck because half of the electrical went out in the truck halfway through my road trip across country. But it was like it checked all these boxes. Once I got to California from driving it from Miami, the first road trip that I did, and I got here and I was like, every squeak, every misshift.
Yeah.
And listen, we work on our cars ourselves. I mean, I did a lot of work on that car myself, but when it got into things like I started to feel something weird, and it probably was nothing, but I just went, that's going to be $7,000.
Yeah, dude. Oh,
and it sucks because it's not even so much that, could I afford it? Could I not afford it? It's the level of anxiety of being able to say, I don't want to feel like that car. And listen, if an old car breaks, it's, we kind of almost expect it every time we go out.
Right.
You accepted it. But if I'm in a relatively new modern car that I'm using as a daily, I don't want the anxiety of every single time I'm going to flip a switch and something's going to go bad. And it's not all of them, but there are enough out there to where you have to just, and there are people that have the same mindset what we have with old cars. They have them with their BMWs. They love them more than anything. And whatever happens, and I'll just deal with it. And if you can get to that mental place, then you know that you truly, truly love that car.
Yeah, agreed.
There's so much, back and forth between cars and women, because it's like, you're never going to find the perfect woman. But if whatever flaws that woman might possibly have, and you say, you know what, I can look past those and I still love her no matter what. There you go. Put a ring on it. So in this case, put insurance on it.
Well, dude, we're gonna end there because I think that's the exclamation point on the end of this podcast. Oh God. So Vinny, thank you so much for tuning in, dude. It is coming on as a guest. I mean, we do and can talk for hours. For those out there, Vinny, where can everybody follow you? Where can they see your social stuff? Where can they follow you? Get in touch with you.
Instagram is the easiest usually with everybody. It's Vinny Russo 1, Vinny with a Y, not an IE. Vinny Russo 1 on Instagram. Most of my other social media, Twitter and stuff like that is all the same as well. So you can find me there, or popping in on all kinds of different podcasts and videos and car shows, near you.
Oh, speaking of car shows, talk a little bit about, really quick before we end, about what you're doing with Hot Wheels.
So I'm helping run the Hot Wheels Legends Tour this year, and the quick version of it is there's a series of car shows that they do on site. Every one of the shows gets a finalist picked as the winner for that one, and then each of those locations, the winners will go into a competition against the other finalists, including that they're doing virtual entries right now, so you don't have to be on site if you can't make it to one of their locations. And we've got Phoenix September 10th, September 24th is Dallas, and then October 8th is LA, and those are the last 3 live ones. But the end result of this, that every year when they pick the winner out of the finalists, they get their car turned into a real Hot Wheels diecast. Not just one, they get sold worldwide through all their distribution retailers. So as a car guy, to have we all had Hot Wheels collections, but for your blood, sweat, and tears that you built to be recognized to the point where there's some kid who's going to walk into Walmart, pick your car off the shelf and buy it to take home and play with it.
That's
pretty good. Here in the field. Yeah, it hits right here in the field, because that's not, I mean, you can get a trophy, you can get recognition from other friends and things like that, but to have a kid, go walk into Walmart and buy your car just like you bought, somebody else's as you were a kid is a big deal. So it's a neat show, and it's probably super kid friendly, probably one of the most fun car shows you'll ever go to, because there'll be Huracans parked next to 1924 Model Ts, parked next to some guy had a Ford Ranger. They took 2 fronts of the Ford Rangers and welded them together, and you couldn't tell which way the car was supposed to go. And the creativity is just insane out there. And the neat part for me running the show with the judges is to see all the competitors, and every show somebody says it to us at one point. They're like, my car, I only go to those type of shows. If I got a lowrider, I go to the Cruisins. If I have a, whatever, I go to Cars and Coffee. They're like, I wouldn't have gotten to see all of these cars because I wouldn't have gone to somebody else's show with my car because it wouldn't have fit. So, and we arrange the cars just like you would see them on the shelf. There's no rhyme or reason to where the cars are parked. Not, it's not all the Chevys are here and the Fords are here. It's whatever rolls in, that's where you park. And everybody lets their kids crawl over the cars. So it's neat to see the car community come in together with one common cause, which is really just, fulfilling the dreams of all these kids walking around and turning these kids into what essentially would be the next generation of car guys just like us. So it's a really, really neat show to be a part of. And so we'll announce the finalists after SEMA later on this year. But in the meantime, 3 more live shows. And if you want to enter a virtual show, you can get all their information on Hot Wheels official Facebook page.
There you go. All right, everybody. With that said, we thank you for tuning in to the Hot Rod Barbecue. Vinny, thank you as always for coming on.
Anytime,
I'll probably talk to you later this
me.
afternoon, because I'm sure I'll find a car that I want to buy, and you'll probably talk me out of it. So
I hope so. We'll see.
But that's it,
all right,
folks.
man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.